So now, after looking at the history of how there were investigations about what matter was all about and what radiation was all about, let us now see what were the theories which were propounded, and then what were the difficulties with those theories and why new theories were needed, and finally, what is the quantum theory will be dealt in the third part of the lecture. So, I will begin with the different theories by showing you the, as you know, that Democritus in 450 BC, he said that all matter is made up of atoms, and atoms are eternal and invisible. Matlab they cannot be broken, they will not die, and so small that they cannot be divided, and they entirely fill up the space they are in. Now, these Democritus was a Greek, and Greeks were thinkers. They never did any experiment, but then they thought that if you keep on breaking up all matter, finally you'll not be able to break it any further. So they call this as atom. Then in 1808, there was Dalton's atomic theory regarding the combination of atoms and so on. But long before these people, there was an Indian monk called Acharya Kanad, and he also talked about the atomic theory. Not only the atomic theory, even the Newton's laws of motions were propounded by him long before Newton, long before Dalton, and so on. And he gave the name Anu and Parmanu that we use in Hindi or Sanskrit. And the discoveries, anyway, let us go on to the discoveries that were made that showed that this was incorrect. The atoms are not indivisible. In 1897, Thomson, he discovered the electron, and this was perhaps the most important discovery for chemistry, because chemistry is all about electrons. And he got the Nobel Prize in 1906. All of them, it was so easy because they were finding new theories about something which was totally unknown. 1913, Moseley, he discovered the proton, and he got the Nobel Prize the same year. 1932, Chadwick, he discovered the neutron, and this was the last discovery because, as you know, neutrons are uncharged, so it was difficult. And then, based on all these, there was a theory that was given in 1904 by Thomson, which is called the Thomson plum pudding model. If you've seen that during Christmas time, you get these plum puddings. Plums are something like raisins which are there, and you have a cake where randomly there will be these plums which are there. So similarly, he thought that there is a positive charge which is smeared all around, and in between there are electrons like plums which neutralize the charge. Then Rutherford did his famous gold foil experiment, and this experiment proved that the positive charge is not smeared all over. It is concentrated in a tiny nucleus, which is much smaller than the atom, and there is electrostatic repulsion that the alpha particles felt for the nucleus, and so that theory was wrong. So he got the Nobel Prize for chemistry in 1918. And you see, most of them are classified as physicists, but as we know, all these discoveries were important to us as chemists. And look at this model that Rutherford made, that there is a positively charged nucleus in the middle, and around it the electron is moving. Now the problem with this model is that if the electron is rotating around the nucleus, then it is constantly changing its velocity, because velocity is not speed, it has a direction. So if it is going in a circle, its direction is linear direction is going on changing. That means it is accelerating, because if velocity changes, it means there is an acceleration. So acceleration is taking place, and that means if there is acceleration, there is force, and this force means that energy is being lost. So finally that electron will keep on losing its energy and fall into the nucleus. So it is not a stable atom, which is not true because atoms are stable. So this was the difficulty with the model. Meanwhile, there were certain experiments which proved that the energy levels are quantized. And one of these experiments, the most important, was the hydrogen spectral series, the emission spectra from hydrogen atom. Now you will see why the quantum theory grew due to spectroscopy, because spectroscopy is the experimental verification of quantum mechanics and vice versa. From spectral studies, they got information about quantization. So in 1885, Balmer he discovered a series that is famously known as the Balmer series, and it is in the visible region of the spectrum. He found four lines. He found, as you can see, there are four lines in the spectrum, and then later on, other people like Lyman he discovered a series in the UV region. The again visible is the easiest because we are more familiar with visible. So Balmer was the first one to discover. Then in the IR region, you have plenty of other series, Passion, Bracket, Phone. Then there are those in the UV, Humphrey series, and all which were discovered much later. But they all proved one thing, that the energy levels are quantized. Now, this information was taken by Bohr, and Bohr said that the problem with the Rutherford's model was that it was limited, that the electron was not stable in the atom. So he said, suppose the atom is composed of electrons which are in fixed orbits around the nucleus, not randomly in any orbit, but fixed orbits, and these orbits were such that the angular momentum, which classically is given by mass into velocity into the radius of the orbit, that is quantized. That means it is an integral multiple of h by 2 pi, where h is Planck's constant. And then he said that the first orbit would have n is equal to 1, then the next one would have n is equal to 2, because n can only be a whole number. So only in those orbits it would be stable, in between it would not be stable. So that explained the hydrogen atom spectra, because if an electron jumped from a lower energy level to a higher energy level, then it would absorb energy, and vice versa. If came down from a higher energy level to a lower energy level, then it would lose energy and you would get emission spectra. But that would correspond exactly to the difference in energy between the two orbits, which I'll call as delta E, and this would be equal to h nu. So light of only a particular frequency nu which matched that delta E would be absorbed or emitted. So he also got a Nobel Prize in 1922, and so this is actually Bohr's model, that the angular momentum is quantized, not the energy. Energy became quantized as a consequence of angular momentum. The angular momentum is a vector quantity, so I put an arrow over it, but its magnitude is given by mvr, and this is equal to n h cross, where n is a whole number. And this is how we define the angular momentum. If there is a body which is rotating in a circle, it will have an angular momentum. Its linear velocity is the tangent there, and then the r is the radius, and L is equal to its mass into the velocity into the r value. Now, a possible reason that Bohr's model was valid was that suppose it is an integral multiple of the angular momentum is an integral multiple of h cross. If we look at the different orbits, then and exactly n number of wavelengths fit the circumference. That means there won't be any interference in the wave, and that is why this particular orbit will survive. The electron in one particular, you've seen for n is equal to 4 at the top and n is equal to 6, it is a whole number of wavelengths, so there is no interference. So now it is behaving like a wave of and so there was a possible explanation for Bohr's model, that there would be no um, interference. So up till now, people thought either something was a wave or it was a particle. But now there were conflicting experiments which were showing electrons are behaving both like waves, because you are seeing that interference is a phenomenon that waves show. They were also absorbing and radiation was behaving like a particle, which we thought as waves. Electrons we thought as particles, they were behaving like waves, and radiation which we thought was waves was behaving like particles. So there was a need for a rethink about what we were thinking at that time. So now the modern atomic theory takes into account that both radiation can behave as particle or as a wave, and similarly matter can also behave like wave or particle. So when, because spectroscopy is the study of absorption and emission of radiation and interaction of matter with the radiation, so we need to study both the radiation and the matter, and we have to take into account that both of them can behave like particles and both of them can behave like waves. So first we'll characterize the wavelength, the electromagnetic radiation, and we say uh, that ray of electromagnetic radiation light can be described as a wave or as a stream of photons, either as a wave or as a stream of photons, and photon is a packet of energy. uh, and we'll see that this name photon was actually not there at that time. It came, G.N. Lewis gave that name. So, what is electromagnetic radiation? If you think of it as a wave, then it is electromagnetic. That means it has an electric field, it has a magnetic field. The electric field is the red sine wave that I've shown here, and the black sine wave is the magnetic field. And the third direction could be the direction of propagation of the wavelength of the wave. Now, if it is a wave, it has a wavelength, and you see that the maxima are called the crest. Crown means crest, so they are the maxima, and the bottoms are called the troughs. So either you take the distance between two adjacent troughs or two adjacent crest, it is called wavelength, and it is given the symbol lambda. A is the amplitude, which is the height of the wave, the maximum height of the wave, that is given by A. So, since it is a sine wave begins with zero, so it is a sine wave, and it is going. It completes the cycle in 2 pi. So it is. We can say y is equal to a sine 2 pi x by lambda, because lambda is when it completes one cycle. Alternately, instead of x, we could think of that third axis as time, and in that case, you can see that since 2 pi is one cycle, y is equal to a sine 2 pi nu t, and where nu is the frequency now, and that is the number of cycles per second. So, if you compare the two equations, they have to be equivalent because y is the same, it is the height of that sinusoidally moving wave. So that means nu is equal to uh, c by lambda, or c is equal to nu lambda. That means that they are inversely proportional. Nu and lambda are inversely proportional to each other, and c is called the speed of light, and it has a universal value for all electromagnetic radiation. It is equal to nearly 3 into 10 raised power of 8 meters per second. The SI unit is 3 into 10 raised power of 8 meters per unit per second. Now, the various variables that are used in spectroscopy are, sometimes we talk about the wavelength, because that is given the symbol lambda, as you say, and because it is a length, it has the unit of meters, but we hardly ever use meter, we use nanometer. Earlier we used to use angstrom. Nanometer is 10 raised power of minus 9 meters. It is proportional to a meter. The second quantity that we came across is frequency, and nu, that is the number of cycles per second. So it has units of second inverse. This is also called hertz. I'll tell you why in the next slide. And speed of light is c, which is a constant. It is in meters per second. Another unit that is used very often, it is called nu bar, the wave number, which is not c by lambda but 1 by lambda, and that takes care of a large factor. 3 into 10 raised power of 8 is not there, and this is also equal to nu by c. If you look at the formula, c is equal to nu lambda, it is equal to nu by c. So you're dividing by 10 raised power of 8. So frequency comes in units which are manageable. Otherwise you would be having units like 10 is power of large numbers, which we don't want. And although it should have units of meter inverse in SI, but we still continue to use centimeter inverse because units that you use in spectroscopy is a matter of convenience. Because centimeter inverse, the in electronic spectroscopy, the values are like 25,000 centimeter inverse, which can be managed. In IR spectroscopy, it is like 1000 centimeter inverse, again a manageable unit. And in microwave spectroscopy, it is between 1 to 10 centimeter inverse. Again, it is a manageable unit. So we continue using centimeter inverse in all books. Till now, they will be using centimeter inverse, and meter inverse is hardly ever used. Now, who is this Hertz, after which we have named a unit second inverse per second. After Maxwell gave all his four equations which characterize light as a wave, in 22 years afterwards, in 1887, Hertz discovered radio waves. Now, these radio waves have the lowest energy, as you can see from here. It starts from radio waves here and goes on to gamma rays here. And you see that the wavelength keeps on decreasing. It becomes like, faster and faster. The wave keeps on decreasing. Now, as you know that delta E is equal to h nu, so energy is proportional to the frequency. Larger the frequency, larger will be the energy. But frequency and lambda are inversely proportional. So when lambda is small, the energy is large. So you have the radio waves, which have very large wavelength but very small frequency, and then we go to the microwave, then we go to the IR, and then you go to the visible UV, and then X-rays, and then finally to the gamma rays and so on. And you see, the beauty of spectroscopy is that in different regions you get to see different kinds of spectroscopy. In radio waves, you will see NMR spectroscopy in the radio wave region. In microwave, you see the rotational spectroscopy. Not only that, you also get the ESR spectra there. In infrared, normally you see vibrational spectroscopy, and then when you go to visible and both in both of these, visible and ultraviolet, what you see is electronic spectroscopy. X-rays, you do X-ray diffraction to get the structures of crystals and other such structures. And gamma ray is a very high energy radiation, which is not of interest so much to chemists. It is for nuclear transitions. So these are the different wavelengths and their relationship and the energy. So Planck's quantum theory, I should have discussed before, and we've already talked about it. He said E is equal to h nu, that the energy is quantized, and h is Planck's constant, which is a very small unit, 10 raised to the power of minus 34 joule second. And he said that energy could only move in quanta, it was like a particle. And then Einstein did his experiments on photoelectric effect. Just remember, at that time when we thought waves are waves and particles are particles, these people were propounding new theories, not even believing in their own theories. And for a long time, Einstein refused to believe that something could behave both like a particle and as a wave. And then finally, his experiments like photoelectric effect forced him to believe that electromagnetic radiation itself is quantized, and the name photon was given by G.N. Lewis. And we talk about Lewis structures, and Lewis was a chemist in his own right. He gave us so many theories. Now, when we are talking about radiation, we'll talk about some of the different definitions. One is, what do we mean by monochromatic radiation? Mono means single, mono, ek. Then chrome means light, and that means light of a single frequency or wavelength. It is called monochromatic. And if you have different a range of frequencies, then it is called continuous. And you know that white light from the sun, light from a bulb, that has all wavelengths, the visible light. So it has a range of colors which you can break up using a prism, And you can see white light, it is split up into all the seven colors of Vibgyor, the rainbow. And then if you have blue light, it is monochromatic because it has only one wavelength, or yellow light or green light. But if you have white light, it is not monochromatic. Now, what is the mechanism of interaction between the radiation and the electron, and the matter? So, we've already seen that the radiation consists of oscillating magnetic and electric fields, but we ignore the magnetic field because the interaction with the magnetic field is much weaker than that of the electric field. So, we'll look at the electric field, and it is like a sine wave, so it is oscillating all the time in space and time. It is changing with x, it is changing with t. X is space and t is time. So atoms and molecules, they can absorb the, if their frequency is matched, they can absorb energy from electromagnetic radiation and go to a higher energy level, or if they are already in a higher energy level, they can emit radiation and go to a lower energy value. You can see like this. Suppose there are three energy levels in a particle, in some atom. I'll name them as E1, E2, E3 in increasing energy. So when emission takes place, it can take place from E3 to E2. Because the energy difference is small, you will get a wave with a certain wavelength. Then when it goes from E2 to E1, because the energy difference is large, the length of the arrow is large, you notice, and that means that the frequency of the radiation will be large, wavelength will be small. So the see how they have gone like this. They are here it is wider, here it is less. But if it goes directly from E3 to E1, then the energy difference is much larger, and you see how fast this is moving like this. So frequency of the photon is proportional to the change in energy, and delta E is equal to h nu. Now, if you compare atoms and molecules, in atoms or molecules, both of them, absorption means it goes from a lower energy level to a higher energy level, emission from a higher energy level to a lower energy level. In case of atoms, the only energy levels that it can have are the electronic energy levels. So that is the only transition that can take place. Molecules, because I mean, look at the hydrogen molecule. It has two atoms. They can vibrate like this. They can rotate like this. But a single atom, even if it rotates, it's like a sphere. It looks the same. So atoms cannot rotate. They cannot change their rotation energy, vibrational energy. Only their electronic energy. So So you get only electronic spectra, and the lines are very sharp. The difference in energy nu is equal to the frequency is given by the difference in energy divided by h, because delta E is equal to h nu, so nu is equal to delta E by h is equal to E2 minus E1 by h. So this is either the energy absorbed in absorption radiation transition, or emitted in when there is emission. So waves, what we have seen up till now is that waves are characterized by different quantities, which can be direction in which they are propagating, the amplitude, how high the sine curve is, the wavelength, the frequency, the angular and linear velocity. And matter has dual character, so electromagnetic radiation also has dual character. It can behave like wave and as particle, which are called photon. As a wave, it can be considered as a traveling wave having mutually perpendicular electric and magnetic fields normal to the direction of propagation. It can also be considered as consisting of photons carrying energy. The electromagnetic radiation comprises a large number of spectral regions, starting from microwave, not microwave, radio waves, and going on up to, in radio frequency region, you see NMR spectroscopy, and then up to the gamma ray, where nuclear transitions take place, which have very high energy. And the first ideas about quantization came from Planck, and Planck's constant is a very famous um, So you can understand that atomic spectra are line spectra. They are very sharp lines because there is no simultaneous change in vibrational or rotational energy. Historically, atomic spectra was what was understood first. So I always make it a point to teach atomic spectroscopy before the molecular spectroscopy. The reason being that what you can, it is uncomplicated. Only electronic spectroscopy, electronic transitions can take place. Normally, in some books, they will, classify according to the energy range. So, because these are electronic transitions, they take place in UV and visible region. They will first do electronic transitions of molecules and atoms at the same time. Whereas molecules are more complicated, you need to understand vibration and rotations before you are able to understand the electronic spectra. So that is why I normally teach it this way. Normally, no, always. Rotational and transitions, vibrational transitions also take place, but we are studying electronic spectroscopy. We will not bother about those. So these are molecular spectra and atomic spectra. Look at them. The top one is the molecular spectrum of H2 molecule, the hydrogen molecule, and this is for the hydrogen atom, the H atom. It is so simple, simple lines, but this is very complicated because hydrogen molecule will also have vibrational energy levels, the rotational energy levels, very complicated. Simplest molecule H2 is also complicated, but hydrogen atom is very, very simple. You have discrete lines, which you can interpret. So this is the hydrogen atom spectra. Hot atoms or atoms in an electric discharge, when you put them in an electric discharge, they go to a higher energy level, and from there they can emit radiation in the form of discrete lines, discrete colors. And this is an emission band, and absorption is a little more complicated, but at the same frequency. It's the same frequency. All this is a line sketch of the same thing. They will occur at the. This is more. So the hydrogen spectrum, how was it interpreted by Balmer? Balmer was the first one to study the hydrogen spectrum, and he not only observed these lines, he observed four lines in the visible region, and they were red, blue, blue violet, and violet. So these four lines, he was able to see their wavelength, and he tried to fit them to an equation, and this is the equation he got, that uh, nu bar is equal to a constant which we later called the Rydberg constant, and it was 109 something centimeter inverse, and 1 by 2 square minus 1 by n square, where n was always higher than 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and because there were 4 lines, so it must have been 3, 4, 5, 6, and this could not be explained by classical mechanics. So people were forced to say that there is something quantum going on, and this led to the quantum hypothesis. So Balmer, he discovered that the lines in the visible line spectrum of hydrogen fit a simple equation, and Rydberg later on found that this is a universal equation. Instead of 1 by 2 square, you have to put 1 by n1 minus 1 by n1 square minus 1 by n2 square. N1 in the case of Balmer series is equal to 2. For the other series, n1 is equal to 1 or 3 or 4 or 5. It varies, but this is the general equation, and RH is called the Rydberg constant. N1 and n2 are always integers. They cannot have decimal values. So Bohr, he noted the line spectra of certain elements and assumed the electrons were confined to specific energy states. These were called orbits. Since the energy states are quantized, the light emitted from excited atoms must be quantized and appear as line spectra. And he did a lot of calculations, and he came to the conclusion it is the same Rydberg constant, but it has a value equal to minus in joule. This J is for joule and not a variable, minus 2.18 into 10 raised power of minus 18 joule into 1 by n square. So now you can understand, one energy level will have energy equal to, E1 will have energy equal to this constant into 1 by n1 square. The next level may have 1 by n2 square. So when a transition takes place, it will be 1 by n1 square minus 1 by n2 square. So these were the different energy levels he got. Uh, when n is equal to 1, minus RH by 1, minus RH by 4, minus RH by 9, they become closer to each other. The last energy level will be minus RH by infinity, 0, and then the electron is not bound to the proton. And see, these are the various possible transitions, and this could explain the spectrum of the hydrogen atom. The n is equal to 1 level is closest to the nucleus, has the most negative energy, minus RH. Minus RH by 4 will have less negative value, so it is higher in energy, and so on. And this is closest to the nucleus, so the electron is attracted to the proton more in this, so the energy is the lowest. So this quantitatively does explain the hydrogen atom spectrum. And you see that if you compare hydrogen and sodium, you will see that the spectrum is different. You can see these are the two D1 and D2 lines of hydrogen atom, of sodium atom, sorry. And that we know about the sodium Weber lamps that you see on the streets, and now they've gone. Now you have LED lights everywhere, but uh, and hydrogen doesn't have these D1 and D2 lines. So every element has their own set of lines. So these are the three kinds of spectra that you see. One is when you have white light and you pass it through a prism, you can break it into 7 lines, and this becomes a continuous spectrum. When you have a hot gas, the electrons are in a higher energy level. When you pass through a prism, then you will see that transitions take place and emission spectra is observed, and these are discrete lines. And finally, if you have cold gas but you shine light on it so that it goes to higher energy level, absorption spectra is obtained. Again, same lines are observed, but in the background you have a continuous spectrum. So these are the different elements. See, hydrogen is different, sodium is different, helium is different, neon is different, calcium will be different. All elements you can characterize. So this is the beauty of spectroscopy. That if you see a particular, say sodium D lines, you will be sure that sodium vapor is present there, where you see the sodium D lines. So this is what spectroscopy, the use of spectroscopy. So you can see that the absorption spectrum can be used to identify elements, because every element has a different spectrum. And these are the emission and absorption spectrum of sodium. See, the lines coincide. जो यहाँ है, same here. So whether it is emission or absorption, it is at the same position. And so the Bohr's model was that electrons were, remember, the energy was proportional to minus RH into by n square. And so the energy, when it went from a final energy state to an initial energy state, the photon that was released or absorbed had an energy equal to h nu, and so delta E is equal to h nu, and this is equal to hc by lambda is equal to minus Rydberg constant in joule, and 1 by nfi square by 1 minus ni square. And if the final energy level is higher than the initial level, then it is absorption, and if it is lower, then it is emission, obviously. And but there were limitations to the Bohr model, although it was able to explain the hydrogen atom spectrum. Not only hydrogen, helium, when you remove one electron, it becomes a single electron system. Helium ion, He plus ion also. Lithium, when you remove both the electrons, it has 3 electrons, remove 2 electrons, it will be left with one. You can understand its spectrum from the Bohr model very completely. But electrons he described as particles, which were moving in the orbits. And you cannot describe electrons completely as particles. They are also as waves. And second, when you look at that time, the spectrometers were not very good, but when you look closely, each line gets split into two, and this could not be explained by Bohr's theory why each line was actually two closely spaced lines. The resolution of the instrument at his time was not very good, so he was not able to um see that. So with that, I finish the quasi classical models, because this is Bohr's model is classical as well as quantum mechanical, but not purely quantum mechanical, not purely classical. So this was the last of such models until Schrodinger came into the picture. He combined everything, and this is the final what we know about the structure of the atom. So I'll do that in the next section of this lecture. And